Chapter 361. Consequences. Maven Blackbriar's POV. It had been 10 minutes since the commotion outside calmed down, but I still refused to let my guard down. The dragons may have beaten those mercenaries and were too busy feasting to attack any further. Or at least, that is what my idiot court wizard's research said they would do. Not that the dunce's word was to be taken seriously. How the old hag managed to graduate from the college, I will never understand. Ingun's nervous shuffling draws my attention, and I look at my pale daughter, holding dearly onto a vial of poison, as if that would somehow save her from the terrors outside. Calm yourself, fool child. We are safe here. She takes a deep breath and calms her breathing, nodding rapidly as if trying to convince herself that I was right. Sibby had no such compunctions, however, his deranged giggling enough to unnerve me, even if I would never admit to it. Foolish mother. He drawls, "You fear the dragons, and you are right to do so." He giggles again, "But you forget the other monster we must fear." My hand twitches in anger, and a small twinge of pain I dismiss as a product of my mind. "I do not care about the elf right now, Sibby. Keep your crush to yourself." His giggles turn to cackles. "Oh, sweet mother, sweet mother." The choice of words does not inspire confidence. He will know what happened here before we do. I hold back a growl. I do not know what got into that fool Hemming's head, but I am not losing the rest of my family to God's damned dragons. He goes to respond with another idiotic quip, but loud knocking draws our attention, and Maul's voice comes from beyond the barricaded door. "Jarl Maven, the dragons are dead." I release a sigh of relief, the immense tension leaving my shoulders slowly. But the world would not give me peace. They were killed by... He pauses hesitantly. "Reinforcements." I unlock the door and pull them open harshly. "I did not pay you to be a coward, Maul. Tell me what happened." I growl at the cowering man, and immediately pause as I see who was standing next to him. "Hello, Maven." Dagoth grins widely, and I already know things had just gotten worse. So let me get this straight. Dagoth speaks softly, sitting on my throne and flanked by a tall elf in pale plate armor and his much shorter right-hand man who was playing around with a dagger. "You placed your forces in front of your city, foregoing all the immense fortifications of an ancient hold." He pauses, as if baffled by the idea. "So that you could what? Preserve the infrastructure?" "I did not want the fighting to enter the city itself," I explain myself, and oh, how the fact I even needed to do it chafed on my pride. Far more people would have died if they attacked the city directly. The population is too tightly packed. He rolls his eyes. "Please do not pretend you care for your people, Maven. It is almost offensive." I hold back a scowl. The mercenaries were paid well to do their jobs. If they are willing to die for money, then don't blame me for throwing it at my enemies instead of my family. And yet Hemming was seen leading a group of guards and nobles to face the dragons. Dagoth points out lazily, "Could it be that you lost control of your dearest family, Maven?" Sibby cuts in with an amused rasp. "Dear Hemming got the glory disease in Windhelm. Poor thing thinks he has honor after killing a few undead." "He made some friends, yes." Dagoth shrugs. "And some rather interesting connections with your neighbors with his actions." A scowl does form this time. The fool wants to get himself killed when he can rule instead. "Your son's respectable action aside," Dagoth forces the topic aside, "some of those mercenaries were the Dawn Guard, men and women allied to me whom I had personally sent to aid your city in case of an attack." He leans in and growls, "And you used them as dragon fodder." "Shit. If you wanted them protected, you should have sent word." A flimsy response, I knew, but nothing else came to mind, as I felt a knife at my throat that was not there. "You threw an elite force of vampire hunters, armed with artillery, into open battle against a dragon." He grits out, "If Isran had died today, I would have burned you alive for your fucking audacity." Before our back and forth can continue, the doors of the great hall open, and my son marches in, followed by his own men and some of Dagoth's forces. Fire has been put out. He reports without even deigning to acknowledge our positions. "Excellent." Dagoth's whole demeanor shifts, and he grins. "The wounded?" "Your healers managed to save most of the critical ones." Hemming grunts. "Some still died, but a large number of those we thought dead were only partly burned, or merely had their bones too broken to keep fighting. Altogether, 400 dead warriors and mercenaries. Nords are rather resilient. The elf nods, genuine respect in his eyes. What about the populace? The losses are thankfully very low, but Hemming trails off and gives me a hesitant look before steeling himself. The wall failed to stop multiple shouts from affecting the city. The current count is some 800 dead. The elf remains silent for a moment before sighing. Less than I expected, but more than I would prefer. Hemming nods solemnly. Such things happen in war. They shouldn't, Dagoth scowls, and to my astonishment he genuinely means it. The moment I think it, his eyes meet mine. Surprised Maven. I just scoff, much to his visible amusement. Dagoth turns back to my son. So would it be safe to say that you have things well in hand? Aye, Flametongue. He nods. The city will be brought to order within the day. Good. He nods. I recommend you grant thanehoods to those who proved themselves today. Riften lacks proven warriors in its ranks, and this is a perfect opportunity to strengthen your rule. Hemming looks at him with confusion before giving me a quick glance as well, and his eyes light up with familiar greed, barely held back, so he doesn't miss what recognized as an opportunity. He has no right to give thanehoods. I hiss before I can think better of it. I am the Jarl. No. Dagoth's eyes flash threateningly. You will abdicate for your son, or I will find another family to lead this hold. He leans in, and I feel the air become heavy. You have disappointed me one too many times, Maven. It is high time you retired. Only the knowledge of how utterly useless it would be stops me from ordering Maul to kill him on the spot. Sibby begins to giggle in his usual deranged manner, but a pinching motion of the Dunmer's hand shuts his mouth. And then my idiot son has the temerity to blush, leading to a genuinely disgusted scowl from Dagoth. Just go sit in a corner. The elf sighs, much to Sibby's obvious amusement. Another elf appears behind him, a woman whose beauty I quite literally find myself unable to describe. I like him. She titters at Sibby, her presence alone making the short one, Davos still with fear. Who in oblivion was she? You would, Dagoth sighs, audibly disappointed. Hello, child. The woman dashes over to Sibby without making a sound. You and I have much to talk about. You have no authority to demand my resignation. I look back to the elf, uncaring for Sibby's new friend. Dagoth merely raises his eyebrow. Do you wish for me to make you join a temple as well? I had not felt such indignant rage ever since my fool of a father almost threw away all of our fortune with his gambling. But not even the near destruction of our clan came close to the endless hatred I was feeling right now. And the bastard knew it, his grin widening with each moment as my emotions threatened to take control of me. But I understood his position. I knew damn well that this was the right choice for him. I had proven too willful, and my son more easily molded. He would discard him as well if he proved foolish enough to refuse cooperation. No matter, I would still have my businesses and contacts, and my clan would rule the city. I could salvage this. Oh, and Maven. He interrupts my trail of thought. Should you attempt to take control of the city, or any kind of control that is not for the sole purpose of your son's righteous rule, I will know. I glare at him, as if my gaze would be able to harm him somehow, but in the end I knew I was defeated and finally grit out, very well. Capital. He claps his hands, the heavy air gone as if it were never there. He gets up from my son's throne. That is all the business I had with the Blackbriars today. The hold is yours, Jarl Hemming. Do keep up the good work. He claps his hands and is gone. Hemming grins and sits on the throne without any hesitation, giving me a mild, apologetic look before looking to the short elf. You are welcome to remain in my hold for as long as you need to. Davos of Dagoth inclines his head. Sure thing, boss told us to make sure no further idiots join the dragons, and that everyone at least has shelter for the night. We will be out of your hair tomorrow at the earliest. He twitches his head at the armored elf. Come on, Anondor, there is work to be done. The armored elf looks to Hemming and bows. May your rule surpass your ancestors, Jarl, and follows after Davos. The moment Dagoth's people step outside, I grab a nearby chair and throw it against the wall, shattering it into pieces with a shrike of rage. Damned bastard, I spit. Hemming clears his throat. Calm yourself, mother. Calm myself, I growl. The fucking knife ear thinks he can order us around to do anything he wants, and you want me to calm myself? Yes. Hemming's face darkens. Be happy I proved myself in Windhelm and defended the city today, or we would have certainly lost the Jarldom today. I don't care about you proving yourself, I care about us being shamed so publicly, I spit out. We have not been shamed. He points out coldly, you have. And while I agree that the court mage's influence is too great, your flailing does you nothing but shame you further. I growl, ah yes, how wise you are suddenly, now that you have stolen my position. I was not raised by a flailing shrew, mother. He grits out, control yourself. A biting retort is barely held back at my teeth, and I remain silent. Good. He nods. All that matters is that power remains within the clan. I was already your heir, and you can focus on the business side of things while I curry favor. I already have an in with a lot of the Winterhold soldiery and the new Windhelm Council. All we need to do is survive, and we will prosper like never before. My scowl could not have been deeper at being so thoroughly pushed into a corner, but I could also not stop the genuine pride at my idiot son finally growing up. And then a loud titter broke the spell, and our eyes were drawn to the corner of the room, where the beautiful Dunmer woman had just finished giving Sibby some kind of coiled spider token. How in oblivion did I forget her presence? And what is that toke? Wait, a coiled spider. Dagoth's order of agents. Mephala. My eyes narrow at the not-elven woman, who just looks at me with eyes deeper than any I have ever seen and winks. Why, I would be delighted to join your club, your ladyship. Sibby bows, devotion in his eyes. Just say the word, and we shall create such delightful mayhem. The day woman titters. Oh, you are a treat, my dear. I will keep in touch. She blows him a kiss and disappears. A silence descends upon the room for a long while before Hemming breaks it. Sibby, what just happened? He asks cautiously. Sibby looks at us with a wide, deranged grin. Do you wish to learn about our Lord and Saviour, the Webweaver? He asks, his grin somehow widening. And there I was, thinking my day could not have gotten worse. Chapter 362. Calculating the Damage. Raven's POV. Leaving the solemn Isran behind, I made to check if anything critical remained before I had to go to Solitude and see the true extent of the damage. I shudder at the mere though of how many people died today. Oh sure, the cities no doubt survived with some casualties, but the villages were simply put fucked without lube. Well, we did try relocating as many as possible, no point in getting depressed over it. An agent shuffled out of a nearby shadow and dropped a scroll on my table before wordlessly leaving, offering only a slight incline of his head in acknowledgement of my presence. Let's see here, I mutter. Dawnguard has lost half of their people in the fight, and they are still the most numerous in terms of survival. No wonder Isran looked like someone shat in his bed. The siege engines are recoverable, and the automatons I lent Maven were mostly intact. The bitch did leave them stationed on the towers meant for people after all. The looting had already had the time to start and get crushed by my people. Only 24 houses were ransacked, and only 46 people died in the ensuing fighting. Man, do I hate this fucking city. You know what? Fuck it. I am leaving this shit to Davos. I have better things to worry about than the literal rotting arsehole of Skyrim. Without a further care in my mind, I snap my fingers and recall myself to the mage's tower atop the Blue Palace. The housecarls open the way almost hurriedly as I step into the throne room, the chaos inside as loud as it was expected. The thanes, as usual, were shouting at each other. Falk looked like he wanted to strangle them, and Ingvar looked like he wanted to be anywhere except here. The interim court wizard was the first to notice me, the thin Altmer giving me a light nod before returning to his orb with an almost obsessive focus. A mere second later, Torrig's head twitched up from the scroll he was reading, and his expression lightened somewhat. Raven. He greeted, and the hall turned almost deathly silent. What happened? But I was not about to answer the question without asking my own, how bad is it? He looked just about ready to grind his teeth, but he understood the need of context well enough to answer first. Multiple settlements were burned to the ground today alone. Reports are streaming in constantly, so I don't even know if more of my people are dying right now. He grinds out, his near-frothing fury evident. Eastern Whiterun lies in ruins. Riften's walls were brought down, Morthal lost an entire district, Dawnstar its harbour, and I have no doubts that even more will be lost before the day is out. He breathes in deeply, so I ask again, Raven. What happened? Right. I nod, more to myself. We used what information we had to follow the upsurge in dragon cultists and went to put them to the sword. Everyone nods along. That was the point of the excursion. What was not outright stated, but was still very much so. Part of the plan was that they were converging around a dragon mound. A dragon mound? Erica cuts in with a blink, like a burial place. No, it was their shit pile. I grouse, a tad more annoyed than I was willing to admit. Of fucking course it was a burial mound, you swit. Suitably chastised, he shuts his stupid fucking mouth. Where was I ask needlessly. Yes. So the idea was, since Alduin needs to actually revive his brothers, we would ambush him while he was drained from the ritual. A good plan. Torrig nods. But what went wrong? Nothing went wrong. I snort, much to their disbelief. We killed the recently revived one, Sahloknir, in moments and fell upon the World Eater as we planned. I delivered a rather nasty wound to him with some means I will not reveal, and Minthara nearly cracked his cowardly spine. But? The king frowns. But? I nod. He started pulling his divine powers onto Nirn. Helm looks at me like I grew a second head. Erica chokes on his wine, Bryling goes white, and Falk frowns deeply. Torrig just stares at me, waiting for the explanation. We survived, obviously. I smirk. We were able to counter him long enough for Akatosh's edict to do its great work. And this is where I pause. But, before he could be banished fully, he sent out one final command to his brothers, no doubt ordering them to do as much damage as possible and conquer in his name. And so here we are. Torrig sighs and slumps into his throne. Report just came in. The Ultima wizard calls out, Winterhold has been completely secured by the college and its Jarl. 2 magi of great power are moving to Dawnstar and Windhelm respectively to provide aid where needed. Good, Falk grunts. How swiftly can they cover the holds? Dawnstar has already been placed under protection by the Master Shalazar. The head of the Flamehearts informs me that any dragons remaining have been placed under simultaneous attack, and one had already fled with grievous injury. I snort, fucking lizard wizard. The court give me odd looks, but just shake it off as my usual eccentricity. The Ultima goes on. Windhelm will take a bit of time. Court wizard Wunferth has already begun cooperating with Master Tolfdir Eben Frost in chasing down the Soul Dragon, still ravaging the west of the hold. He clears his throat. He shall proceed to Morthal in short order. Farengar secret fire notes that Whiterun has already been cleared out as well by local forces. Durek and his lot did their job then. Hopefully Delphine's dragon murder boner was satisfied. I do not want to waste any more breath on her stubborn ass. Torrig sighs in relief. The honourable magi will get their due rewards after this crisis has been dealt with. You can rely this to them. At once, High King. He bows and gets back to work. Before we could speak further, the door to the throne room is opened once again, and a pair of familiar figures walk in. Legate Rika looked to be in pristine condition, if a bit tired, but the figure next to her. Well, let us just say that Serana's eyes were blazing with power as she grinned at me. Serana, I spread my arms welcomingly and scoop her up in a hug. I see that my message has reached you. It has. She nods happily and leans in for a whisper. You didn't tell me dragon blood was this delicious. And I blink and give her a look. How the fuck should I know how dragon blood tastes? She shrugs and lets me go, offering Torrig a slight bow, to which he responded with an incline of his head. So it was you? I hear Rika whisper before offering a crisp salute to the king. King Torrig, we have been patrolling the less defended settlements as commanded. On our patrol, we found the Lady Volkihar standing atop a freshly slain dragon. And the dear legate was kind enough to invite me over to the palace. Serana grins, far, far more chipper than I remembered her ever being, a marvelous sight if I do say so. We are of course delighted to welcome you into our halls, Lady Volkihar. Torrig nods along, the pleasantries ingrained into his very bones. But I can't help but wonder about the reasoning behind your hunt. Oh, that is simple, she smiles. Raven asked me to. The young king sighs and mutters, of course he did, and looks up to me, and you did not see fit to inform me of this. She is here to help, but that is no reason for your warriors to relax. I shrug easily. Better that they be paranoid about the very real threat of sudden sky lizard than rely on the good Lady Volkihar to do their jobs for them. He rolls his eyes, annoyed at my dodging of his question, but unwilling to waste any more of his energy on questioning me about something so beneficial for his own personal hold. Instead, he looks to Serana, and does this request from our mutual ally carry a deadline? Of course not. She answers immediately, and with a sudden seriousness she did not carry a moment earlier. I do live here, even if it is on the outskirts. I roll my eyes. That is semantics, and you know it. She shrugs. It is all you are getting, eliciting an amused snort from me. Whatever your reason, know that you are welcome to stay here as long as you like. Torrig brushes past the perceived awkwardness with practiced ease. My king, Falk cuts in, as grateful as we all no doubt are for the good lady's help, how do we explain her presence in the palace? Torrig cups his chin for only a brief moment before his eyes shine with an idea. A mercenary archmage from High Rock, here to hold down the defenses while the heroic court mage and dragonborn hunt for the dragons outside our walls. The steward hums and nods in approval. As good an explanation as any. I fold my arms. What no? Pardon me, my lords. The shivering voice of the Altmer mage draws our gazes, the Mer's golden skin looking paper white as he looked at his orb. He breathes in and closes his eyes. I have just received word that Falkreath has been ravaged utterly, and the Imperial supply train with it. There is a silence then, for just a brief moment as we compute what in the ever-loving fucking shit just happened, and how exactly whoever did it managed to avoid both my sight and that of Crine, and that of Shalazar as well. My eyes narrow and turn slightly bloodshot as I channel a downright ungodly amount of magicka through them, immediately turning my gaze to the south and slightly to the east. The lack of anything problematic immediately making my hairs rise, as whoever laid the trap was so good that they managed to make the place look at peace, while it was no doubt being ground to dust. Absently, I note the walls and windows in front of me being tinged with red, as I channel even more power through, using my liberated soul as an additional channel, and then and only then do I notice a very gentle spell being laid over an entire fuck-mothering hold. I pushed another surge of magicka, tinged with my divinity, just in case it was more of Mora's fuckery, but found it to be completely natural in its existence, as far as magic was natural in this world anyway. The worst part, however, was that I could not even begin to track its source, as it felt aggressively neutral in nature. Like it was always there, and we just did not notice it at all ever. I blink rapidly as I retract my sight. This would be Shalazar's job. Whoever did it did not carry the usual deathly tinge of a dragon priest, and took great care to hide from someone of my nature. I needed to focus on the real problem, and chasing after obvious bait was not something I had bloody time for. Before I could even lift my orb, it already buzzed with a message. Lizard Wizard. Already on it, Raven. Focus on Alduin. Will report as soon as I find the culprit. I don't know how long I stared at the damned orb, but it must have been long enough, because only Torrig's slightly frustrated and mostly worried shout of my name brought me out of the utter surprise that was serious Shalazar. Sorry, I mutter and look to the immensely upset court, not at me, obviously, but at the situation. I was trying to gleam at what had happened. It seems the dragons have had help, knowingly or not. Great, Torrig grits out, just bloody great. Whoever it was, it does not matter. I cut off his frustrated grumbling. The attacks will only escalate, and nothing will end them except the slaying of Alduin and another taking his place in rule of the dragons. And how do you plan on helping the Dragonborn slay him? Falk Firebeard asks. She is the only one that can, you have already told us this, but if he was banished from Nirn by Akatosh, how do you even reach him? Well, about that. I shift awkwardly. I may or may not know where he was sent to. I trail of, very awkwardly. Raven. Torrig leans in. This isn't the time to hesitate. Where is the World Eater hiding? Sovngarde. I admit slowly, he is hiding in Sovngarde. And it was then that the High Kong utterly lost his composure. He is fucking what? Ah, and there it is. Chapter 363, a bit of relaxation and a plan of action. I groan and let my face plant into my study table, explaining to Torrig just what exactly Alduin was doing in his people's afterlife was an exercise in patience and careful wording. All the Nords present, including even Erica, which somehow managed to surprise me, were to say the least fucking livid, and keeping them calm enough to listen to me for even a minute almost made me telekinetically shut their mouths, which I thankfully managed to stop myself from doing. Being friends with Torrig only went so far after all, and magicking the High King is a bad idea, no matter how unthreatening Skyrim as a whole was to my person. As if sensing my thoughts, Akulakan shifts ever so slightly, his posture turning just that little bit more battle-ready. Naturally, the rather gratifying scene is promptly ruined as Scorch pats the armored giant's head with his wing and coos. What a good boy you are. The automaton doesn't so much as twitch, but Scorch's eyes keep their amused glow as he continues patting for a while. My head, which I had slowly begun rising, promptly slams back into the table, but I fail to contain the amused snort at the scene. Said snort promptly turning into a bout of chuckles as some of the day's tension finally left me. Why so glum, my dear? The familiar voice of Mephala purrs into my ear. You won a great victory, you should be celebrating. She leans in, with me preferably. Suppressing a shudder, I lean back into my seat and roll my eyes. Ah yes, the victory which led to the death of thousands of innocents and the destruction of an entire city. Falkreath was more of a large town, but I wasn't about to add semantics to my grousing. She pauses, leaning away from me, before offering me a soft smile and patting my shoulder. They were already attacking the mortals, dear. Your actions changed nothing, save for panicking the uppity little child. You know this. I scoff. Let me be sour in peace, woman. No. She smirks. You are far more endearing when you are planning the demise of your enemies instead of pouting about not killing them all with a passing glance. My slowly forming retort disappears and my mouth shuts close. I give the eldritch demon god creature before me a flat glare before chuckling ruefully. Can't even get depressed about reasonable shit anymore. This is my life now. Quite. Her smirk widens to shit-eating proportions. Now come with me. You are in need of a break. A part of me is tempted to tell her in no uncertain terms to fuck off, but a much larger one was curious about whatever she was trying to scheme up. So grumbling petulantly, I got up and followed her. As it turned out, she wasn't scheming about anything. Mephis' eyes gleam with amusement as she sips on her tea, every movement dainty and ladylike. You really should stop drinking that dirt water, dear. Everyone knows that anyone of any real worth partakes of the superior beverage. My eye twitches. Uh-huh. She titters. As I was saying, dear old Dagon has been doing some rather delightful renovating in one of his lesser realms. Apparently he wanted to see if he could make an actual paradise like that fool Cameron tried during his last invasion. And how is that going for him? I raise an eyebrow. Imagining Mehrunes Dagon doing gardening was a rather amusing image, even if he would obviously never stoop that low. Oh, it is going terribly. Her eyes practically glow with vicious amusement. He had to scrap the entire project about 300 or so times by now. Apparently his peons are not used to his creative aspects and keep turning his paradise into a battlefield the moment a dispute appears. I snort. Can't imagine their usual profession is all that good for architecture. You'd be surprised? She grins. They know the ins and outs of building far better than most mortals, in fact, what with how often they tend to destroy them and all. No, the main issue is the environment itself. Vibrant green grass just doesn't click for them. In any case, I cut in. You were about to tell me about the sudden end of your clique's little meet-up? Ah, yes. She turns slightly irritated at the memory. We were having a great game of it when dear old Sheo suddenly stood up and left. Poor Azura was devastated. She coos. She was about to get her first win in a millennium. My eyes narrow. Did he say anything as he was leaving? She tilts her head and lets out a light hum before shrugging. He kept muttering about his buddy calling him down for a game of fish stick at the graveyard. Ah, is all I say to that. I had some guesses as to what that meant, but I wasn't about to bother with deciphering it. That way lay madness after all. The knowing glint in Mephalah's eyes was rather telling, however. Suddenly she stands up. As delightful as this has been, I must leave now. Do enjoy the rest of your day, dear. She blows me a kiss and returns to her realm. I just lean back into my delightfully plush chair and let out a contented sigh. It would appear that she was scheming something after all, namely getting me to relax. How utterly devious of her. With my breath feeling just a tad lighter now, I get up and leave the lounge. Might as well make myself visible to my subjects and assure them of their safety. The ensuring of their further efficiency in feeding the war machine went without saying. The smell hit me before I even saw them. I had spent a good few hours just chatting up my people, checking in on the garrison, bothering Karsus about the growth of the city, and visiting Nightshade, who had grown rather attached to her little apprentice, so much so that the talented little pyromancer spent most of her time in Nightshade's suite than in her own home. In any case, as I finished my rounds and gave a short lesson to my growing number of magi, I found myself strolling to the portal room, a light premonition drawing me just in time for the Markarth section to light up, but not from where I expected it. Instead of the city portal itself being used, the way shrine I placed was located exactly on the border with Harfingar. And there they were, stepping through was the group of conquering heroes, covered in varying amounts of blood and guts, and looking half dead or on their way to it. Well, Marco, Junior, and Lydia did. Minthara looked smug as all fuck. The moment they step through, all of their eyes meet my own, and I immediately ask, "Had some fun on your trip, I take it?" Marco sighs and begins to speak. Marco's POV, flashback. Fuck, why does she always have to hit so hard? I wince in pain and begin jumping around while hissing and uselessly tapping my no doubt mangled foot. Fuck this, Minthara snaps. He is not getting away, and that is final. And without even taking a moment to consult us, she breathes in and shouts, Wuldnar Kest, completely uncaring about launching us about with the suddenly violent air as she appeared almost right next to the poor fucker who did all he could to speed his way north. So, I mutter, my pain forgotten, we going to chase her or? Juness sighs and begins walking to the edge of the wall, a grappling hook already in hand. Raven's POV back to the present. So let me get this straight. I pause. You chased the dragon across half a hold. Minthara nods happily. And then you. I trail off, unable to comprehend just what in the actual fuck I have just heard. And then she proceeded to disembowel the poor fucker with her hammer, jump through said bowels, and rip out his spine through his stomach. Yes. Marco finishes helpfully. The smug shit that was Minthara couldn't look more proud if she tried. After which she ate his soul, Marco adds even more helpfully and mutters, as if taking his dignity was not enough. Yes, I do think that is what I've heard you say. I sigh, part impressed and part disgusted. The far too enthused demigod crosses her arms. You sound disappointed. Not disappointed? I correct, just amazed. I choose my words carefully and she beams, oh, and also go and get a wash, you stink of dragon gut. As I teleport out of the way of a very unwanted bloody hug, I shout over my shoulder, oh, and call Parthenax to meet me on the clearing, we have a plan to cook up. General POV. Atop a clearing behind the great tower of Tel Dagoth and the chantry of Ariel, a group of individuals was gathered, most of them seated upon alteration-hewn stone slabs, while the two immense Dova coiled around themselves so that they could lean low enough and join the conversation. As for the mortals present, most of them were either cautious or outright worried, all save for the serenely calm Raven and the far too eager Minthara. Most of those hailing from House Dagoth looked to be in differing states of tired, all of them having been scrambling about for a while now as a massive order of automatons was placed, and all the soldiers were instructed to be on high alert and prepared to be shipped off to battle at any moment. The Dragonborn's companions were more than content to sit in their corner and listen in. Well, all of them excepting the duo of blades who were eager to participate in the upcoming talks. Their return from Riverwood was met with a grudging respect from their host and very eager cheer once he met the group of companions who followed them. Though the odd stare he gave the ebony-clad Redguard warrior who joined them did raise some eyebrows. Thankfully, the man was accepting of his exclusion from the upcoming discussion, as no one was about to trust a newcomer, no matter how good a warrior he was. Durek and a recently healed Ayla seemed agitated for some reason but kept it to themselves. Whatever worried them was of a far lesser concern than what Raven had called them up here for. The final figure, though, is what raised the most eyebrows. A rather insistent King Torrig, who had in no uncertain terms demanded to be present, was currently glaring holes at no one in particular, the recent revelations having made the man immensely irritable and agitated, and most importantly, practically frothing at the mouth for a chance to kick Alduin's head in. Right then. Raven claps his hands, stopping any and all whispering going on. I do believe it was high time we started. Yes. Torrig's voice was cold, carrying none of his usual cheer. Let's. For once, Raven kept his quips in check and spoke seriously. As you all know, Alduin has retreated into Sovngarde, making the task of killing him rather difficult in most cases. However, he adds before anyone can interrupt, I have heard tell of a place, one belonging to the ancient dragon cult, and more importantly, one which holds the portal between Nirn and Sovngarde itself. And you know where it is? Both Torrig and Minthara speak over each other. I have an inkling. Raven nods and looks up to the looming dragons, but I do believe our scaled friends would know more than myself. The dragons share a glance, and Crine is the first to speak. The eldest should be the one. He rumbles, Tell them, Zema, so that they may achieve what we could not. Paarthurnax stares at his brother, then at the expectant elf, and finally at his youngest sibling. Very well. He half sighs, half hums. The place you seek was once the highest of temples to all those who worshipped the firstborn as their god. It is an old place, and powerfully guarded, but it does keep the way to Sovngarde, under the careful watch of the loyal slain. Minthara immediately cuts off his rambling, Where is it located? The old dragon's eyes twitch in a mix of amusement and disappointment that he would not get to speak further, but he does acquiesce in the end, far in the eastern mountains, named after the prophet Veloth. Atop the many crags and cliffs, and unreachable by mortal man, lay the grand temple of Skuldafn. I know of its location, and so does any other Dov. Unreachable by mortal man, Esbern mutters to himself and looks up to the dragon. What do you mean by this? Before Paarthurnax can descend into another long-winded speech, Raven cuts in, You can't get there by foot. Ah. The scholarly blade nods, a rather simple but brilliant defense mechanism. Do not be fooled. Paarthurnax cuts in, It is a veritable fortress, reachable only by those who may traverse the skies. That doesn't change anything. Raven cut in again. Just adds an extra step, really. Torrig, who was about to start cursing at being left behind, promptly shuts his mouth. You have a plan already, Lok Wundunik, the second-born of Akatosh Rubmals. But of course. The elf smirks. Here is my proposal. He turns to the rest, but mostly to Torrig. We will marshal our forces in one place. Only the strongest and bravest will be allowed to join. There will be no use for fodder on this mission. Once we are ready, I will have Crine carry Minthara, and I and whoever else we see fit to bring to guard our backs to Skuldafn, where I will erect a portal and a ward to guard our assault. He raises his hand and clenches it into a fist. The poor bastards won't know what hit them when an entire army of champions falls onto their heads. Murmurs begin to spread amongst those gathered, but soon a loud agreement of varying levels of enthusiasm dominates the field. Say Paarthurnax, Minthara interrupts the clamour before details start getting mentioned. Yes, Dovahkiin? The old dragon rumbles. She tilts her head, considering her idea briefly, and focuses her stare on the dragon. Do you think that some of our kin have begun doubting Alduin's authority by now? The dragon stares back at her for a good 10 seconds and then slowly nods. Thin, you could set up a little Meeting with them for me. She grins with barely contained eagerness. Looking almost pained and hesitating for a long moment, Parthenax finally relents and lets out a long breath of hot air. There are some who would hear your words, Dovahkiin, but not without holding proper tinvac first. She did not look dissuaded in the least. Chapter 364, Time Whizzes. Torig's POV. My hand passes my forehead, revealing a thick sheen of sweat. Uncaring for my lessons of etiquette, I simply wipe it on my coat and return to the letter from Tullius. All the lands, excluding Falkreath, which would need a full restoration, were put to swift order by the Legion. Tullius's message was as simple in wording as it was relieving to receive. A small part of me took cruel satisfaction when I learned that the bandits trying to earn the dragon's favor by ravaging the lands were all put to the sword with immense efficiency. Most of their camps disappearing overnight and leaving their impaled heads for all to see. Most importantly, any and all dragons who had shown themselves in recent times were promptly hunted down by the Dragonborn and her growing entourage. Her ability, and no doubt Raven's, to find out about dragon attacks had grown recently, and even the 2 dragons allied to them were seen to participate in the hunts, even if the greater grey one was said to be immensely reticent. Though thankfully the allied dragons were swiftly accepted by the terrified populace, even if some fools decried them as monsters that should be put down just in case. In truth, there was some grumbling amongst my people, rumours even, about the Dragonborn hiding away and not doing her duty to the world, and to Skyrim, which obviously mattered more to them. But her recent outings put a thorough stop to that, as dragon after dragon was felled with immense might and magic, and most importantly the voice. They say a small hill was destroyed utterly when the already beloved Dragonbane shouted a dragon apart after breaking both of its wings and ruining its jaw. Songs were already echoing in the taverns at her heroic deeds, and that naturally brought all manner of adventurers seeking a bit of glory for themselves. And so, as these things usually go, there was now a company of some 100 men, elves and beasts, following the prophesied hero, all of them mighty and from every walk of life. Companions, wizards, mercenaries, even a legionary or 3 were given leave so that they may hone their skills against our dreaded foe. I do admit to smiling quite broadly when I learned that Skirnir Stormcloak counted himself among their number. His decision in Windhelm seems to have lit a fire under him, and he had already proven himself to be one of the mightiest in the band of dragonslayers. And yet, for all the good news I received, my disquiet remained. Elisif tried, but even her care was tinged with the knowledge that all who died in battle would be faced with a terror from stories told to scare as youths. Not even Tryggve's curious mumblings helped, much to my shame. Truly, even 2 weeks after Raven's earth-shaking revelation, I still could not shake of the utter feeling of dread and despair that gripped my heart. Sovngarde, the resting place of our heroic ancestors who died with valor and glory, used as a feeding ground for a divine reject. A light scoff and a chuckle leave me at the very apt description, not that I would have ever dared to come up with it myself, even against something as utterly hated as Alduin the World Eater. I was tempted then to throttle the elven bastard. Oh, how sweet it would have been to wipe the constant smirk off his face. But he was not smirking then. He knew damn well how weighty his words were and told them with appropriate solemnity. We panicked then. With a bit of pride I realized that my first thoughts were of the utter panic that would spread if his words were heard by gossips and fools. But even as my most trusted housecarls reached for their weapons, in a barely contained rage, we were told that a spell was already placed, bypassing the palace's protections with insulting ease and ensuring we were not heard. I do not doubt for a second that everyone who was in that room now had an agent trailing them wherever they went, ready to silence them if need be. Erica's sudden paranoia was quite telling about that, in fact. By the time we had managed to get our minds back together, shouting came from all sides. All were screaming except myself, Raven and Falk. The old Firebeard looked shattered, his ever-firm back now leaning against a wall for support. Even the vampire looked, not quite scared, but certainly disquieted by the notion. My words silenced all, and I asked him why he would hide something as terrible as this. "And what would you have done?" the bastard asked simply, and knew he was right. And what answer could we give him? Would we commit suicide and throw ourselves at the foul beast in the afterlife? Helm was even foolish enough to suggest it, though that may have been his frothing rage if his bloodshot eyes were any indication. He knew that telling us earlier was useless, and knowing him as I do, after all these years, I forced myself to accept it, and then demanded that I be included in any planning, which I knew he would do. That he accepted without hesitation, stopping me from throttling his lying throat once more. All in all, each and every one of us left that meeting feeling drained, fearful, and absolutely, immensely, indescribably, unconsolably, fucking furious. Alduin would meet his end, this I swear as High King. But first, I need to deal with this farmer's dispute. I sigh and grab the parchment, detailing yet another claim to another man's cows. Damn that fucking chair. Raven's POV. Raven, the deep voice of my friend, draws me from my sketch. I have a request. Blinking habitually, I look up to Durek. His entire face was by now covered in scars he refused to get removed because it made him look more manly or something equally asinine. Not a one, he said as I proposed it. It isn't like fucking stone shrapnel wounds on your already ugly mug would draw the ladies. Ask and you shall receive. I grin at the orc. Right. He nods and hesitates. Come on, Durek. I roll my eyes. You aren't one to ask for help when you can do something on your own, and I can sense this is important to you. Still he remains silent, and I frown. Is this about Kodlak's death? He blinks in surprise, but then smiles and shakes his head. I shouldn't have bothered being embarrassed if this is how quickly you read me. A light snort leaves me. Oh, please, you wouldn't hesitate for a moment to ask me for something that concerns you personally. I may be friendly to the companions, but it is you who is the reason behind that friendship. Yeah. He chuckles and waves me off. So you going to help us? With what? I ask with a smirk. He deadpans at me. Don't pretend you don't know. Your seer bullshit already told you, no doubt. I lean into my seat and scoff a tad too dramatically. Ruin all my fun, why don't you? The massive orc just grins. Right then. I turn serious now. Did you already raid the Hagravens and get their heads? Aye. He nods. It was Kodlak's last request that we hunt for them. We have a dozen heads for all those who wish to abandon the blessing. My eyebrow quirks. Still consider it a blessing then? He shrugs. It makes me stronger and lets me protect the weak better. My soul is a small price to pay, and it isn't like I'm going to get eternally tortured when I die besides. My previously curious expression twists into a mildly disgusted frown, but a part of me does understand his viewpoint and his lack of an outside perspective. Not like I can't discreetly unbind him when he ages for a while anyway. The stray thought hits me, and my mood lightens considerably. Right. I pretend to accept his words, and he believes me instantly, the Gurf. So what is it that you need my help with exactly? Can't reach the tomb by yourselves? Or does Yorland lack his skill to reforge that disgusting axe? I still remember the repulsive feeling I got from the thing, fucking racist-ass piece of forestry equipment. He winces slightly at the jab, but shakes his head. No, we can deal with that on our own easily enough. What we need help with is the ritual itself. We can't be sure it will work, as Kodlak had described it, and having you on hand to make sure of it would be a weight of our backs. I lean my elbows on my study table and clasp my hands together. And you want to do this when? Before we attack the Dragon Temple, he answers firmly. It takes me a moment to ask why. So that Kodlak may aid in the battle against Alduin, of course. Durek grins, fucking grins at the idea. Getting glory even in the afterlife is something the old Harbinger deserves. He crosses his arms and nods proudly. No. A sigh leaves me. I am not throwing a good soul at Alduin, just so you lot can feel proud about yourselves. What? Durek blinks. But wouldn't it be better to have all the help we can get? Durek. My tone in using his name makes him flinch. Do you have any idea how utterly ruinous it is for a soul to be wounded? He tilts his head. Very. I answer harshly. If Kodlak were to be liberated only to have his soul rent in two by the literal fucking world eater, all your efforts would have been for nothing. I growl out, so no, I am not going to let you send a man's restful soul to be devoured just so you can pat yourselves on the back. Halfway through my answer, the poor man had begun to pale, his arms and back shaking slightly at the image I was creating. Finally, his shoulders slump and he sighs. You are right, of course. He bows his head. I will make sure the rest understand the need to wait. And leaves. Ah, poor foolish Durrock, to think you would try lying to me. Scorch appears on my shoulder. Let him cook. I blink. I wasn't about to chase after him. If he is idiot enough not to listen to me after all this, then he will carry the old man's soul on his conscience for his entire life. Uh-huh, Birdman deadpans. And how sweet of you to forget to inform him of the sheer dumb lack of chance for his soul to get there in time in the first place, eh? Risk and reward, Scorch, I mutter, risk and reward. Fucking old fart. He snorts and disappears. I shake my head and teleport to my personal workshop. 2 weeks had flown by already, and the preparations were going along quite well. All that remained was for me to create the best possible gear for myself and ensure I didn't die like an idiot at the last minute. The Daedra had all stopped any and all hostile action. Mephala was rather clear on that one. None of them wanted their playground to be destroyed, and even Mora sent a discreet messenger to his sister to inform me of his one-sided truce. As if I'd dropped my guard before the Squidward cosplayer, still the breather, even with my paranoia, was appreciated. Hopefully Minthara's own preparations would go well. Minthara's POV. Are you sure you do not wish for us to aid you, my lady? Esbern asks quietly as the small part of my group tries to listen in. I do not quite follow your kin's concept of honor and fairness, but you did mention that this one was a rather powerful foe. I appreciate the offer, Esbern, I really do. I smile at the old man. His dedication was something to behold, that was for certain. But if I want to prove myself the conqueror, then I must do this on my own. As you wish, my lady. He bows his head. May Akatosh grant you strength. I offer him a firm nod and then step through the way shrine. The wind around me picks up, and soon I am standing atop a wide and, more importantly, uninhabited plateau. This is it. My fingers twitch around the pole of my hammer, no more hesitation. I take a deep breath, the mountain air serving quite well to calm me before the fateful challenge, and shout Od Seeing. Chapter 365, A Proper Bout of Tinvak. Minthara's POV continued. A few moments pass after my invitation, and nothing seems to happen. Immediately the idea that I would go ignored appears, but I squash it just as quickly. Chuckling lightly, I lean onto my hammer, digging the butt of it into the dirt as I barely contain a facepalm. Of course he would take a while to reach you, Minthara, you idiot. Amused at my own impatience, I allow my thoughts to drift somewhat, going between anticipation towards the fight to a rather entertaining image of a random goat herder getting his bowels scared out of him by a random shout in the mountains. And it is only going to get louder. The more draconic part of me notes with satisfaction, and a grin forms on my face unbidden. Any further musings on scaring innocent hills people are stopped as I hear distant flaps in the wind. The very air, feeling charged as a distant red silhouette, became larger and larger. Odaviing. My eyes narrow as I take a better look at the dragon, Alduin's right-hand dragon. Or so Raven described him. Is an eager warrior, but has a sense of honor as he didn't simply slaughter the legion outside Windhelm as efficiently as possible, giving them the chance to fight back. A prideful one then, even for a dragon. In conclusion, I hear myself mutter with a growing smirk, he is likely to honor my challenge. Odaviing closes in, barely close enough to begin greetings, but before either of us can speak, the air is filled with even more wings cutting through it, and my grip over my weapon grows tense. My eyes dart from left to right, and soon the situation becomes clear. The forms of Krynarvokun, slightly smaller than Odaviing, joined by the utterly massive Parthenax, and Odaviing's own underling Vulstranfane, begin circling above us as Odaviing lands, and in the distance I feel even more gazes falling onto the small plateau I had chosen. A full 10 dragons, counting myself of course, were now present. I have heard your call, Dovahkiin. Odaviing speaks, his head motioning as if to dismiss the onlookers. Eager as I was to face you, I cared not for any trap you may have prepared to fell me, and yet here you stand alone. You sound surprised. I smirk at the dragon. Or do you believe yourself so strong that I need an army to face you on your own? Ha! He barks. The whelp bares her teeth. My eyes narrow slightly, but I do not allow myself to be baited. Instead, I allow a portion of my absorbed power to surge slightly, turning the air heavy. These teeth have sent your master fleeing into Sovngarde. Do you not fear suffering the same fate? Fear? He scoffs loudly. I fear nothing. He declares as if it were a certainty, else I would not have come after your show of power. Now speak, young one, why have you called me forth? A small, petty part of me revels that he was the first to break, but I contain it. Alduin has fled from me already. I aim to slay him and end his reign over both mortal and dragon. I say with full confidence. He may have fled on a technicality, but even his presence on Nirn without his divine power was stretching the Aedric rules already. Naturally, I felt no shame in abusing this for my ends. Odaviing frowns, somehow conveying the expression perfectly, even with his draconic face. You speak truly. Some have already begun doubting his dominion. Oh, I raise an eyebrow. You think me foolish for saying so aloud, Dovahkiin? Odaviing sounds amused. Maybe he really was as fearless as he proclaimed. Or was it just bravado? It is the firstborn's own rule that only the strongest may hold dominion. That he has fallen so low to be questioned is his own failure. Exactly, I nod, which is why I have summoned you here. You wish for me to betray him? He asks, keeping his opinion from reaching his tone. Betray is such an ugly word. I smirk, and I doubt that you would be swayed by that alone anyway. No. I shake my head. Instead, I wish to challenge you. My voice against yours, and should you lose, you will enter my service. And should you lose? He leans in, his eyes lighting up with something approaching eager bloodlust. Then you get to kill me or bring my soul to your current master. I shrug without a care. If I can't defeat you, then I never stood a chance against Alduin in the first place. True enough. He lowers his head slightly as if to nod. But why should I enter your service if I can just leave once Alduin is dead? Why should I exchange one master for another? I could go on and on about you being hunted down by those wronged by our kin, and no doubt not having a moment of peace, but I doubt you would care much for that. Him promptly huffing out a snort was more than enough to tell me what he thought of that. Instead, I spread my arms, my gaze becoming something Raven would no doubt compliment as completely crazed. If you join my side, I can promise you that only greater battles would await. My Thuum begins to leak. Join me and you will never lack for a strong challenge to test yourself against. A silent growling noise breaks the ensuing silence before growing and growing, transforming from a light chuckle into a full belly laugh as Odaviing rears up and roars his laughter to the skies. Ha 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 ha. Very well, Dovahkiin, I accept your challenge. Kri voth akrin. Before we can begin, I grab my hammer, my fingers folding against the perfect grip for a moment. Before I toss it to my side, I would use neither weapons nor dragonrend for this battle. Odaviing's already mad grin becomes even more eager as he too removes an advantage by folding his wings behind his back, and then, as is tradition, speaks Fuse Roda. Mulkar Dov. Vibrant red scales form on any skin I can see without looking away from my opponent, and a light tingle washes over my back. The shout which Raven insisted I learn was exhausting, almost as much as stopping time, but even with its obvious lack of completion, the sheer power it gave me was such that I felt like I could crush Alduin's head between my bare hands. The wave of force slams into me, and I use my hands to dig into the ground, barely stopping the shout from flinging me away. Immediately, I stand back up and look back up, and without a second's pause shout, Shul kun ronaz, summoning a spear of light aimed straight at his head, and more specifically eyes. His eyes narrow into a wince before the light manages to touch him, managing to react just in time with a loud Gol Alok, rising a wall of earth in front of him and immediately chaining into Gol Rath Bo. A veritable river of earth attempts to swallow me, but even with limiting myself to only the voice I was not without options. Fokra Din. I shout, freezing the river of earth and mud, and following my opponent's example, I chain it into a House Redoran, shattering the frozen earth and showering Odavying in the shards of ice. But instead of any damage, all that the shards did was elicit a mighty bout of laughter from the large dragon, skilled and powerful indeed. He shouts out, "Come, Dovahkiin, show me the might that made Alduin flee." I naturally oblige him, Strun Barco. The horn strapped to my belt almost begs me to draw it to empower the shout, but I hold back. I needed to prove myself. A few bolts of lightning slam into the dragon faster than he can respond, but he merely powers through the pain, ignoring the painful-looking scorch marks on his scales and bellows, "Lok va kor," completely cleansing the storm I summoned, but still failing to contain a pant from his exhaustion. Before I can press the attack, however, he retakes the initiative, looming closer to me as if drawn by an unseen magnetism. He shouts, "Fas Ru Ma," a wave of fear stopping me for a brief moment and giving him the time to chain into a Is Slen Noose. Only my instinct saved me from being turned into a frozen statue as my mouth moved on its own, Yul Tor Shul. The almost blood-crimson flames bursting through the ice-form shout and washing over a shuddering Odavying. With a snarl of rage, he took one more step forward and responded with his own fire breath, the words losing their coherence and coming out as more of a shriek as he dragged the final word for 5 full seconds. Not that I was idle at that time, responding with a prolonged frost breath of my own, chilling the very air instead of merely the ground as I slowly but surely pushed Odavying's Thum back. I did not realize it, but halfway through the shout I had begun walking forward, each step driving my opponent back with the sheer force I was oozing. I would not realize it for a while yet, but the dragon aspect shout did far more than merely armor and strengthen me. By the time the elemental storm cleared, I was already moving into another shout, Ven Wul Da. The gust of wind I created was far greater than anything I could ever achieve with magic. Even with my affinity at work, as Odavying was sent hurtling through the air, his path only ending as he was slammed into the edge of a nearby mountain, cracking its surface with the impact. I admit I relaxed a bit then, already assured of my victory. That was a mistake. Krenslen SOS. The wave of baleful red slammed into me without any warning, and I knew then that if I did not use my dragon aspect earlier, I would have been turned into fine chunks of meat. And that enraged me. No longer holding back, I immediately growled, "Slen," my wounds already working to knit themselves together as Odavying opened his mouth to do the same. But I was no longer feeling as sporting as I was when I challenged him, so I began shouting, and shouting, and shouting. For a full minute I kept summoning more and more words of power and slamming them into the defenseless dragon, looking more and more like a chunk of meat, but still somehow surviving the barrage. By the time my fury had lessened, I was left panting and sitting on my arse. The side of the mountain Odavying was slammed into now looked like more of a large cave, and a large chunk of its peak had begun falling off to the north. Idly, I noticed Krynavokun flying in that direction to ensure no one ended up dead for it, but I was too tired to truly care about some random mortals at the moment. It really was a good thing no one could read my thoughts, because that would have made me die of embarrassment. I shudder, and before I can further consider the sheer terror that would be Raven's teasing if he ever found out a noise drew my attention. A half cough, half wheeze left the lump of meat that was Odavying, and his flesh began restoring itself ever so slowly. Already Vulstranfine and Parthernax had landed to our sides, no doubt to ensure that neither of us ambushed the other now that the fight had ended in my favor. A good 5 minutes later, Odavying rolled over from his back and onto his legs, looking at me with tired but thoroughly impressed eyes. I wondered what kind of boisterous proclamation or accusation of cheating he would throw at my feet now, and mentally prepared my tired self for the barrage of words. Instead, he merely lowered his head and spoke, the word that left him clearer than any oath, Thuri. Kri voth Akrin means fight bravely, not a shout but a boast basically. Mulkar Dove means strength armor dragon, AN. And yes, I've changed DIV, worm for Dove because it fits and is cooler. Shul Kun Ronaz means sunlight arrow. Gol Alok means earth arise. Gulrath Bow means Earth River Flow. Stranbar Kyo means Stormwrath Lightning. Lokvar Kor means Sky Spring Summer. Fas Rumar means Fear Run Terror. Tizi Slen News means Ice Flesh Statue. Ven Wuldar means Wind Whirlwind Push. Kren Slen SOS means Break Flesh Blood. Author's note: before anyone asks why they weren't spamming time stops and whirlwind sprints and the like to move about, you gotta remember that this was essentially a dick measuring contest to establish dominance. Nothing mattered but the power of one's voice. Chapter 366. Lizardly Investigation. General POV. A duo of unusual figures strolled slowly through the thick forests of Skyrim's southernmost hold. As the two conversed, one voice a squeaky and the other almost unnaturally cheerful, the canopy gave way to a vast opening, revealing the in some places still smoking ruins of Falkreath. The taller of the two, a silver-haired old man, blinks at the scene, shrugs, and looks back to his companion. So anyways, as I was saying, one of them nasty flying bulls tried to interrupt my sweet Minnie's happy fun times, so I turned him into a brand spanking new tanning rack. Shalazar looks up to his friend and blinks. Did the lucky fool thank you for his new job? He squeaks, barely managing to insert some pretend enthusiasm into his voice as his mind was preoccupied by the scene before him. Oh, he was not very happy. His companion sighs dramatically. I offer him a full-time job with benefits, and he demands that I set him loose back in the wilderness. He waves his hand. Pish posh, I say. Ol Sheo offers the best jobs. Everyone knows this. Did you try offering extra benefits? Shalazar quirks an eye, most of his mind still scanning the ruined city all the while. I hear those are all the rage these days. I did actually. Sheo nods proudly. Offered him an extra roll of cheese from my ultimate infinite cheese dimension, but the poor lad seemed to not like it for some reason. Shalazar shrugs. Well, you did call him a bull. Ah, the old man, and definitely not god of madness, claps his hands. That must be it. Momentarily distracted, he begins muttering, cannibalism is only fun when I do it. And what happened then, old buddy of mine? The lizard wizard asks, his mind promptly deleting the thing he did not hear. He kept rambling about freedom and other foolish things for hours, so I whacked him in the head and made him shut up. She sighs overdramatically, his shoulders slumping low before his entire body straightens, and he raises his hand in proclamation. A good employer can take only so much cheek before discipline is needed. Probably took his mind then. Shalazar acknowledges and nods silently. You holding back on me, Shelley? Sheo asks after a moment. No need to keep things from your old buddy, old pal. He leans down and pats the Argonian's shoulder. Come on then, tell me what troubles you. Old Sheo has all manner of solutions. Already they were walking through the ruined streets. Only a few brave Nords could be seen moving through the debris and looking for survivors. Shalazar knew they would find none, however. Whichever dragon attacked the city ensured that as many people died as possible, and detecting life was incredibly easy for the beasts. Just one word and poof. You see everything. Ah, you know me. Shalazar squeaks silently as he absently lifts a fallen bit of house from a man's way, letting him in so that he can see the corpses and stop his useless search. Seeing this much death just takes it out of me. He admits almost hesitantly, Pa. Sheo claps his shoulder, completely unable to even comprehend his buddy's dismay. To think that the pale scourge would care about a small bit of barbecue. Shalazar's ever-persistent smile, one he had kept even when seeing the city, cracks a bit. His expression darkens, and the air around him grows heavy as he mutters, Yes, I suppose you are right. Finally noticing his little fuck-up, Sheo winces, thinking to apologize, before his twisted mind reminds him of something else, and he once more cheerfully claps his hands. Well, I see you are all dour and stuffy now. Off I go then. And disappears. Carefully looking around so he isn't observed, Shalazar quickly bolts into the remnants of a nearby alley and leans against a wall. His eyes, usually carrying a cheerful aura, now glowed with an eerie bloody red. His teeth gnashed against each other as memories he did his best to keep away kept surfacing. Damn it, Sheo. He curses inwardly as he starts taking deep breaths. Can't remember one bloody thing for the life of you. It had been a rushed decision, well over a full century ago, when he had just finished slaughtering the vast majority of Great House Dres at the head of the army of Black Marsh. He had slaughtered everyone in sight that was not covered in scales, and even some who were. Such was his rage at his earlier enslavement at the hands of the Dunmer. To be treated like a damnable pet for the children. He almost growls out, "At least I got to steal their grimoires when I escaped." And what a memory that was. If only he was wise and chose to leave vengeance aside before it was too late. His mind was thoroughly shattered by the time he finished opening the way to Morrowind, his own people tossing him into a locked hut so that he may not harm any more perceived traitors. Lucidity coming to him quite rarely, as he spent most of his time glaring at the walls. In one of those moments of lucidity, he made a plan, a cunning one. He knew his mind was slowly losing itself to madness, and he understood that there would be no coming back should he fall too hard. So he used his impressive powers to conjure Sheogorath himself and offer to sell him his madness. The price? The Daedra's friendship. And the rest, as they say, is history. "Who is they?" Shalazar mutters absently before rapidly shaking his head in confusion. That was enough of that. He slaps his tiny cheeks and gets up in a mighty leap, his cheerful persona already coming back to the surface. "My most glorious student is relying on me." He exited the collapsed alley straight into the way of a furious Nord glaring at him with an axe held within his hand, the same Nord he helped on his way earlier. Uncaring for what the man had to say, Shalazar merely snapped his fingers and appeared atop one of the still-standing, yet thoroughly scorched towers of the fallen city. He sat down and closed his eyes, his magic and senses soon wrapping around the entirety of the hold. A scene appeared in his mind, of a great bronze beast descending and setting fire to the walls and the houses, of it cheerfully chasing down the residents, uncaring for their age or firmity, and how it spewed poison to cover the city it destroyed, ensuring that none escaped without great fortitude or greater fortune. As gruesome as the memory of the world was, it was not what he sought. His brow furrowed further, and his immense reserves of magicka surged, soon leading the scene away from the city and up to the skies, allowing him to observe as a very light and barely perceptible ward bubble enveloped the whole territory, covering it from any sight or warning that may have come in the dragon's wake. The creator of the ward was a master, of that there was no doubt, but sadly for the pitiable fool, mastery does not a perfect being make. The poor thing must have overplayed its hand, for it forgot to take into account one looking into the past, and into the past did the lizardly wizard look. His sight left the city and surged toward the east, leading him to the still-standing legionary outpost of Helgen, from whence multiple cohorts marched to the ruined city so that they would try and save what could never be saved. The scene flew lower than he had expected and soon guided him into a well-hidden cave entrance. A tunnel system opened up, and he could sense a way to the fortress's dungeons to his current south, but he was not led there. Instead, his vision followed a path deeper into the natural cave, past a veritable horde of burned spiders and their disgustingly hairy offspring, through a tunnel which should not be, and the concealment wards placed deeper within. His soul gaze surged through the barrier, bursting through the unprotected thing and halting just before the tall individual kneeling before a drained pile of black soul gems, the power sources having grown ever more scarce since the humbling of the ideal masters. The elf, and Altmer quite plainly, turned around in surprise, revealing his visage for Shalazar to observe. Midnight black hair, a very neat mustache and goatee, hawk-like noble features, and deep black ebony armor accented with golden Aldmeri runes. What drew Shalazar's eyes the most, however, was not the mer's appearance, but his weapon. For on the figure's hip hung a familiar mace, the symbol of office for the Thalmor's High Justicia. A mere split second was all it took for Shalazar to make the connections he needed, but his intrusion was not without consequence, for the Thalmor leader seemed to notice his observation, stuck in the past as he was, and cast a spell to counter it, sending Shalazar hurtling back into his body and causing grievous injury at the same time. Uncaring for the wave of pain, Shalazar simply left his body and began casting healing magic on it. Thoroughly unbothered by the multiple lacerations on all of his internal organs and the half-dozen or so deadly curses, he dispelled them within seconds and entered his body as one does a set of clothing. Clever little shit. The lizard wizard let out a rare curse, pretentious but clever. The stacking curses were ingenious, probably enough to put down Savos if he wasn't ready, and more than enough to force Phineas to spend a decade stuck in his phylactery on any occasion. Still, this is most concerning. The tiny Argonian mutters to himself squeakily, if they are so suicidal as to sabotage a fight against a world-ending threat, how far would they be willing to go in the future? A copy of Shalazar appears in front of him and immediately counters, or they could be confident enough in our victory that they feel a bit of sabotage would be of no consequence, my most glorious self. Another copy forms, looking at the first one and tutting at it as if it were a foolish child. Foolish of you, O most resplendent copy of mine. He shakes his head smugly. There must be some other overarching goal if they were ready to risk the world ending outside of their terms. A third materializes. Could it be, my imperious simulacrums, that this is but a distraction aimed at our grand design? What was our design again? The first mutters quietly. The second and third shrug. Shalazar deadpans, slow down, foolish selves of my most potent mind. He claps his hands. We must keep on track, lest we lose ourselves in ourselves. Most wise. The first nods, soon followed by the second and third. Shalza Prime nods happily. So, trap, distraction, or attack of opportunity? No other ideas? Nope. No, sir. Nah, He exhales slowly, scratching his chin as he did, still pretending not to know he was being watched. Within the nearby buildings, clutching their rings of concealment, stood an entire troop of Thalmor executors, a strike squad and assassin team in one. They were tasked with ending powerful threats to the Dominion. All of them were looking at the tiny Argonian with slowly dawning terror. At their head hid a woman who had most certainly seen better days. Her mind was barely holding itself together after the torment she had been subjected to by the High Justiciar. Much luckier than her subordinates, she found as they were turned into little better than puppets for their failures. The only thoughts she could gather at the moment were those of hatred and fear for both her opponents and the High Justiciar himself. That the Ultima Archmage encouraged her to seek power to avenge herself only served to embitter her further. Unable to keep herself from fidgeting further, she did her best to make herself as quiet as possible as she turned to the leader of the executors. When do we strike? By the time her eyes reached their intended target, it was already too late. Instead of the vibrant gold of the Ultima Swordmaster, there stood the miniature form of Shalazar, the Pale Scourge, surrounded by the corpse of every single brave elf who had come to her aid. Before she could speak, the Argonian put a finger in front of his disgusting beastly mouth. Shh! And then she felt something slam into her mind. She managed to resist for only a second before she was turned into little more than a vegetable. Chapter 367. Upgrades Galore. Raven's POV. Another week had passed since Minthara's challenge to Odaviing. The smug look she gave me once she told me she managed to get 2 dragons under her command for the price of 1 was rather amusing. Of course, said smug look disappeared the moment I reminded her that none of them were actually bound to her and could not do Krine's neat shadow materialization trick when she called for them. The pout she made then had me laughing my arse off and promptly earned me a challenge to a spar in which she almost managed to catch me off guard by stopping time at a rather inopportune moment. I, of course, paid her back by sicking the skittering swarm at her, earning me an instant victory as she wisely ran the fuck out of the training arena. Still, the time-stop trick did prove that my reluctance to leave my tower in the past weeks was the right decision. While Minthara and her merry band of dragon slayers went around the province, slaughtering any poor fucker who was stupid enough to attack anything beside an isolated homestead, I busied myself in my final preparations. Hundreds upon hundreds of potions I ordered from both Hakan and Morrigan, and any other alchemist of at least expert skills from within and without Skyrim, all to buy just a bit more of a chance and ensure that as many people survived as was possible. The same went for scrolls. All my apprentices, students, servants, and magi of any calling who could do the work were instructed to scribe as many of the damned things as humanly or elvenly possible, focusing mostly on healing and defense, since a scroll was of little use against dragons, and the Draugr would be dealt with easily enough by the horde of elite warriors Torrig was gathering in solitude. But all those things paled in comparison to what I had truly dedicated my time to. Weeks upon weeks of bothering the smiths, of coming up with schematics, of studying Gulda's ways and applying them to my own, and finally of carefully inscribing every inch of cloth and metal I needed, finally resulted in my ultimate set of enchanted equipment. The light show my tower emitted was described to me as being of truly epic proportions by the time I was done with my day-long enchanting session. Some of the more superstitious of my subjects even went so far as to visit the various shrines in my domain and make offerings due to the auspicious occasion. Anyone who said otherwise, though, got their asses beaten into the ground. I had no time for agitators with too much time on their hands, and Davos was more than happy to have his people educate them of the error of their ways. Shaking my head, and thus the thoughts of stupid idiots away, I looked back to the results of my work. A completely new set of 10 rings, all of them made to seem like thin and slightly longer than usual bands of metal engraved with constantly moving and shimmering purple runes, and each and every one of them radiating enough power to kill someone too weak to wear them. Sharmat's Reach. The pinnacle of Tamrielic craft, these rings are enough for one to declare themselves a sorcerer king by the simple virtue of wearing them. Eyehold. Channeling the Eye of Magnus is twice as efficient. Aetherius Descended. Quintuples Magica reserves without limitation. Untouchable. Violently distorts space once the bearer is sufficiently threatened. I almost feared putting the damned things on, almost. My gaze passed then by the amulet sitting right next to the rings, a simple thing of blackened dragon bone held on an ebony chain and engraved with numerous Dovazul runes. It held the shape of a dragon, closely resembling the Septim emblem, save for one detail, a glaive piercing the dragon's heart. Dragonfell Amulet. The bane of time spirits and their progenitors, provides the bearer with immense resistance to temporal effects. Hopefully Akatosh won't mind too terribly. I smirk and my eyes drift to a mannequin holding my newest set of armor and robes, the previous one now having joined its predecessor in my vaults alongside the rings and amulet. It looked much the same as my previous set, save for the far greater number of runes and engravings. Where my previous set was something akin to light plate covered in a mage's cloak, my new set looked downright mighty in comparison, the light plate having been replaced with enchanted Gothic-style armor with the usual Dunmary spin and enclosed in a heavy robe of spider silk I got from Mephala herself, looking more like smoke than actual fabric. In short, I was about to look a lot more magnificent. Vestments of the blasphemer, vestments of Dagoth, the greatest of his line. Highly protective and comfortable, they are made in such a way that they shall remain the same forevermore without any need for maintenance. Blasphemy Unbound channels and guides the bearer's divinity in a far more controlled and efficient fashion. Can only be worn by one of Dagoth's blood. Heavy layered ebony plate mail, weightless. Provides 10 times the normal regeneration of magicka. Absorbs spells of immense potency, up to 500 magicka per second. Ethereal Escape. Transforms the bearer into their soul form, slows time, and grants immense speed in case of grave danger or injury. I smirked happily at the wall of text and nodded to myself. And one final thing. My hand reached for the blade sheathed at my hip, and with a flick blasphemy appeared in my hand. The sword looked much the same with only a small symbol engraved at its pommel being the difference. Flicking my hand once more, I activated the enchantment and the grip of the blade elongated without noise or light, creating a long grip of blackened dragon bone for my new glaive. I swung the weightless weapon left and right, and it felt perfect in my hands. Finally, I could return to whacking people over the head from a safe distance. Though I doubt I will get much opportunity in truth if the staff's enchantment was anything to go by. Mercy's End transfers the effect of the blade attached onto spells, excluding Rulebreaker. A part of me was annoyed that I was unable to transfer Blasphemy's rule-breaking ability to my magic, but I understood that that was probably a good thing after only a bit of consideration. Still, having the Vorpal effect on my spells was a massive buff to my damage, especially if I were to count Dagon's blessing, which I most shamelessly shall. Thoughts of ripped-apart enemies aside, I guess I really should stop procrastinating this. There was work to be done, and my senses told me that Davos had just started heading for my workshop. The moment I put on my first ring, I had to hold back a rather nasty moan as I felt its power spread through my everything. Scorch was still laughing his feathery arse off as I finished soul-binding the rings and moved on to the amulet. That thankfully didn't make me behave like a literal dog, but it did almost put me to sleep with a sudden sense of calm, which thankfully reduced greatly once the binding was done. I did, however, sit down and almost fall asleep once I was done putting on my new vestments. The bloody heavy plate armor felt like God's damned silk. Decadence, utter decadence, I say, and I loved every single moment of it. Still, it wasn't as if all I did was spend my time enchanting. My personal training with the paladins, Akulakan and Minthara when she had the time, had also shown some progress, even if I still wasn't quite the master warrior I wanted to be. STR 54 to 56, Dex 55 to 58, VIT 81 to 85, Mind 88 to 93, Mag 1650 to 1700 8500. Jesus fuck, that is a lot of magicka. I let out an appreciative whistle, my left hand whipping to the side and applying a slight pressure onto a nearby table via telekinesis. The downright massive surge of magic I felt at my fingertips felt like they were about to make them burst for a moment, but the pressure soon disappeared as the table I tried lifting promptly turned into tiny steel shavings. And yes, it was a god's damned steel table. Welp? Scorch appears on my shoulder, his flames noticeably brighter. That looks like it is going to take some getting used to. Good thing we will need all the brute strength we can get, eh? I ask, smirking slightly. Before he can answer, there is knocking at the door, and I wave my hand to open them, this time under far greater control, and with presence of mind I only make the doors shudder slightly under the force of my magic, instead of outright shattering them and killing the person knocking. Boss. Davos walks in and nods his head. You have guests. He pauses, hesitating for a moment. Unexpected guests. Whomst? I quirk an eyebrow. He narrows his eyes in confusion, but then just shakes his head. A delegation from Great House Redoran, apparently. They have the proper documents and the banner, but I didn't know if we should just let them into the tower. Did the leader introduce themselves? I ask. Davos nods. Almiril Farron, house brother of Great House Redoran. Well, at least they sent someone of sufficient rank. I shrug and mutter, so that should mean they mean actual business, but we are talking about the Redoran here, and they aren't ones for shenanigans anyways. So should I let them in? Davos draws me from my thoughts. I wave him on. Sure, I did expect them to send someone, but not this quickly. Lead them to the dining hall and offer food and refreshment. I will be joining you soon enough. Sure thing, boss. He salutes lazily and leaves. Should have asked him how Nightshade was doing. I mentally slap myself. She is just about approaching the end of her pregnancy. Well, no matter. I get up and clap my gauntleted hands, not even feeling the metal pressing onto my skin, as I did best that I got moving now, or I will be spending the evening in the chair. Having unsummoned my equipment and instead dressed myself in a proper noble suit, I left my rooms and started walking in the direction of the dining hall / reception room. But before I could leave the hallway, a nearby door opened, and a rather stressed Minthara stepped into the hall. Hey, Raven, she greets me, looks into my eyes, and then down, obviously embarrassed about something. Greetings, Dragon Overlady. I bow dramatically. How can this humble mage be of assistance tonight? She rolls her eyes and then hesitates once more before steeling herself. We will be attacking tomorrow. She half states. Yees? I raise an eyebrow, my mouth already twitching into a grin as I realized where this was going. She crosses her arms, one of her hands reaching for her hair as she began to twirl it. Well, I was thinking, since we will be fighting for our lives soon enough, maybe you would want to. She looks away, her face having taken on a similar hue to her hair. I let out an amused chuckle, making her huff and give me an annoyed if heatless glare. My opposition to the idea has been thoroughly chiseled into submission at this point, so I decide to give her a bit of motivation and buy myself just a tad more time to procrastinate about my life decisions. Tell you what, I grin cheekily and she perks up, beat the ever-loving shit out of Alduin, and I will forget every possible protestation I may come up with. Suddenly her eyes narrow into slits and she becomes almost hyper-focused. He is dead, she mutters, he just doesn't know it yet. I let out a burst of laughter, soon joined by Minthara as she realized what just happened. Shaking my head, I turn to leave. Oh, and congratulations. What for? She asks. You know how I never officially ended your apprenticeship. I turn to her with a smirk. Well, here you go. And toss her a College of Winterhold certificate, giving her the rank of High Battle Mage. She looks down on the elaborate folded scroll and then back up at me. You better hold to your promise. She growls almost hungrily. I chuckle and disappear in a shudder of shadow. Chapter 368, The Scarab and the Beetle. General POV, a slight bit earlier. Almirall Farron, house brother of the great House Redoran, felt his brows crease as he and his retinue were led through a portal below the city of Winterhold. That the hold was on a war footing against beasts of legend only served to make him more tense, as the resident Nords all looked at him and his followers with harsh suspicion. A reasonable suspicion, of course, but going through thrice the scrutiny and even getting stared at by the Archmage of the college for a while to ensure a lack of dragon cult influence. An insulting proposition for most nobles, but not for a dutiful son of the Redoran. Nay, Almirall understood full well why the Nords were tense, the dragons were a menace, and he himself participated in heading off one of their raids, where his house managed to slay one of the beasts at great cost. The shoulder pad of red, accentuated blackened dragon bone on his right arm, was his reward for maiming the vile thing and letting the Archmaster finish it off, even as the memories of getting burned nearly to death now haunted his every dream. Even the priest's assurances that he was now under the gaze of Boethia did little to bring up his dour mood. Too many had died for just one dragon, and now he would bear the honor of the trinket till his dying days for the luck he had in surviving. And so, heaped with honors they did not desire, he and his men were sent to Skyrim to treat with the resurgent House Dagoth and its immensely powerful leader, if rumors and reports were to be believed. He was no diplomat, but as one of the Redoran, he'd obey the orders of his superiors without question, even if he did internally question the Archmaster's apparent belief in his abilities. The Archmage, who was also rumored to be the apparent grandsire of the Dagoth, wasted no time on pleasantries and went to work the moment he teleported into their presence. A show of power, no doubt, but Almirall could appreciate the expediency. He cast a few spells, none of them hostile, and sent them on their way with a small invitation to visit the college and converse once they were done. The Redoran nobleman wanted nothing but to slink back into his homeland the moment he was done, but the opportunity to gather information from the Archmage was too great to let slip through his fingers, and so he accepted the invitation with all the gruff stoicism his family had beaten into him. They were led to a walled-off section of the city, a small fortified compound inhabited primarily by his fellow Dunmer and decorated with numerous black flags emblazoned with the purple beetle of Dagoth. As for why he felt his brows crease as they passed the portal situated under the compound, it was the fact they were teleported in front of a series of white city walls, smack dab in the middle of a great valley, vibrant with plants he could not recognize. For a moment he thought they had been betrayed, but the relaxed posture of his masked guide, a proper soldier if his equipment was any indication, soon disabused him of that notion. No, what truly made him frown was the fact that they were teleported right in front of the city when he knew damn well that they could have been led straight to the Lord's residence with equal effort. No mage ever sacrificed comfort for practicality. He knew this as he knew the sun rose in the morning and the moons came at night. Keeping most of his annoyance in check, he turned to the guide. Is there any reason we were led here? The implication would be clear enough for all but the least of simpletons. The masked guard looked at him for a moment, but remained silent. He went to ask again, but the sound of the wall gates opening drew his attention, as did the trio of figures stepping from them. One was a tall elf, clad fully in white plate accentuated with gold, while the other was clad in the same way his guide was, except for the far greater embellishment present on his arms and armor. A distinction of rank or experience, he wondered. The figure in the center drew most of his gaze, however, a short but not quite short enough to be called small. Dunmer clad in some very expensive-looking leathers, which were no doubt enchanted with more power than Almiral's entire unit put together. He looked unassuming at first, a bit well off looking for a Dunmer commoner, but nothing special beyond his obviously expensive clothing. And yet if Almiral had to select the strongest of the three, he would definitely choose the short one. He felt that one wrong move was likely to end with him, with a dagger in his throat, and no idea how it got there. It did not take him long to connect the dots from the reports he received. Lord Davos of House Dagoth. He spoke first, in a rather ill-thought but necessary attempt to get some kind of advantage in the talks, ill-thought in Almiral's mind by any standard. "That I am, Sarah." The short Dunmer nodded, a slight raising of the eyebrow, showing he was more impressed than surprised by the naming, though his almost switch from Sarah to Sergio did confirm the reports of him being commoner born. Davos continued as if he didn't just notice the Redoran catch his slip. "Beside me are the Captain Oren and the Paladin of Auriel Anandor." "Paladin of Auriel?" Almiral's brow raised. "I had heard rumors of Lord Dagoth consorting with Aedra, but I did not think he would go so far as to create a knightly order for one. As amusing as the attempt at gathering such information is." Davos grins lightly, annoying Almiril to no end, but not enough for his facade to break. There is no need for it. Anandor is not Dunmer, and has entered Lord Dagoth's service after he liberated his people from their unfortunate state. The Paladin, almost as if the scene were choreographed, unclasps his helmet and removes it. "Indeed, Lord Dagoth has been gracious enough not to attempt to lead us from our faith." So the rumors of Falmer were true. Almiral's mind races, but he makes a point of keeping his face still. "As fun it is looking at you trying to hide your surprise." Davos interrupts his racing thoughts. "I would appreciate it if you could introduce yourself and your people." "I am Almiral Farron, house brother of Great House Redoran. Accompanying me are my retinue of kinsmen and oathmen." Almiral bows lightly, his training snapping him out of any confusion. "Here on orders from Archmaster Varan Serrano to negotiate with Lord Raven Dagoth about the import of his Dwemer contraptions, as offered by one of your agents." Davos nods lightly. "One of mine was indeed instructed to deliver such a missive." He turns and signals for them to follow. "If you would follow me?" "If I may, Lord Davos." Almiril speaks up as they begin ascending through the walled canyon, the many crossbowmen manning said walls quickly showing why their welcoming party was so low in number. "Just Davos, if you please." The short elf waves his hand, "for the sake of expediency, if not for my own comfort." "Very well, Davos." Almiril nods along without bother. Why exactly were we delivered before the walls and not directly to our destination? The question of, "Are you playing games with us right now?" went unsaid but not unheard. "My lord is currently busy with preparations for a strike against the dragons." Davos reveals easily, "His steward thought it prudent that we lead you through the city to dispel any unfortunate ideas our kin from Morrowind may hold of our house and its practices." Prudent. The Redoran warrior nods. Many a noble of Morrowind felt threatened by the return of the Sixth House, though none reacted or could not react due to our land's current state. "Ah yes, rather amusing that." Davos chuckles to Almiril's confusion. Noticing the expression, the short Dunmer smiles at his guest, merely laughing at the early attempts some of the lesser nobility made to hire the Morag Tong. The rumors of the different masters of the order throwing the money back in their faces were quite entertaining until they stopped. Almiril did not show it, but he could easily admit that such a scene would have been greatly entertaining. "It is very rare for someone to be protected by the guild," is what he said instead. "Maybe my lord is just that lucky?" Davos smiles, uncaring that his guest could now see the necklace bearing the sign of the webweaver in plain sight. The Redoran knew better than to immediately speak, even as the implied revelation was more than enough to shut him up for a while. He and his party were then led through the series of walls, all of them good magic, reinforced fortifications, which could hold off great armies and survive a lot of punishment under siege weapons. The city they entered afterwards, Silrune Fell, proved to be a wonder in miniature, especially to a group of dark elves who were used to their homes being covered in ash more often than not. Even in the current state of Skyrim, the residents all looked eager and motivated, all of them dressed in respectable clothes and looking to be well-fed, bustling around like bees in a beehive and yet somehow managing to avoid creating a commotion. A true orderly chaos was the long and short of it in Almaril's mind, and he did not know what to think of it. He was unsure if his hosts were fools then, when they brought him to the House Dagoth's own training grounds. Hundreds of Dunmer and some Falmer were being trained in marching formations and how to fight against other units with surprising efficiency. None of them were of the level of a Redoran champion, that was beyond doubt. What they surpassed them on, however, was their equipment. Every single one of their armors carried weak enchantments, and the veterans amongst them were even more endowed with power. Almaril could see quite easily how such a force could butcher anyone in front of them, and those foolish rumors of Dagoth's army being a bunch of peasants and fools playing at soldiers while their liege did all the work were swiftly dispelled as he watched the orderly line of shields and halberds smash into another of its kind. When he saw the repeating crossbows at work, though, he wanted to cry. Some things in this world were just that unfair. Some hours into their tour, they were suddenly led to the distant tower by the sun god's temple, the opulence of both city and resident growing with each step they took. The insides of the tower far surpassed the outsides, and Almaril knew then that should the Redoran ever face the Dagoth, their victory would be a bloody one. Even if he grudgingly admitted, it would not be a thing of certainty. It was not the magic he felt in the air, nor the size of the thing which surpassed all the great mushrooms of the Telvanni by a grand margin. Nay, the thing that brought him to such a conclusion was the well over 100 magi of respectable power walking about, talking to each other, practicing and cooperating in pursuit of their power. "They aren't killing each other," was his reaction in short. They were then brought to a vast dining hall, and Lord Davos excused himself so that he could call on his master for the meeting. His men were tired and showed it. He was also but kept his discipline, and when they were offered with a veritable feast on their table, he could do nothing but accept, gorging himself and thus leading his men to do much the same without a singular care about their state as guests. They were not important enough to poison in any case, he reasoned. Fed and watered as they were by the end of the hour, they all relaxed in their plush seats and awaited their much-renowned host. And just as they managed to collect themselves and not look like a group of barbarians, the master of the tower entered the room. Tall, well-groomed, and more importantly incredibly young for his position. The presence of Lord Raven of House Dagoth may as well have been that of someone who did not share in his kind's mortality, nor in their lack of personal power. Almaril felt like an entire mountain was pressing onto both his shoulders and mind as the glowing red eyes met his. And in the next instant the pressure disappeared, their host feeling as if he was not even there in the first place as he took his seat at the head of the table, the slightest glance of his eyes trailing Almaril's shoulder pad. Remembering his manners and the not-so-subtle warning, Almaril bowed his head. "Greetings to you, Lord Dagoth. House Redoran has come with an answer for your offer." "This has been relayed to me, yes." The young lord smirks lightly. "I do hope that you can forgive my earlier lack of hospitality. There was some work to be done, and I could not delay it any further." "It is no issue, my lord. The Redoran speaks, your subjects were gracious hosts in your name. And the food was no doubt a good balm on your pride." The mage lord smirks further, but quickly schools his face after, "Alas, that is all the time I have for pleasantries. The slaying of the dragons approaches, and my participation will be instrumental." "You aim to end the dragon god?" Almaril spoke before he could think. "Well, we can't just leave him running about." Lord Dagoth shrugs. "Besides, we have a dragonborn on our side and a good plan already in motion. Those of the Dover who can't control themselves will soon find their hides used for my undergarments." The insulting ease with which the young lord spoke of ending the dragons and his reputation for slaying them in droves swiftly drove any and all duties to his house from Almiral's mind, leaving only his burning hatred for the beasts which killed his kinsman at the fore. This plan. Almiral spoke slowly. How certain you are it will work? The lord of a great house shrugs again. It will work or the world will end. No point in overthinking it. The world will end? Almiral hears his kinsman mutter with horror. Apparently their host had heard them, for his expression turned wry. Why exactly do you think the little shit is called the World Eater? He asks, as if speaking to a small child. Uncaring for the deepening colour on his follower's face, Almiral grins almost manically. We want in. And what about your house? Raven Dagoth smirks, his purpose fulfilled. Were you not sent here with a purpose? The Redoran elf stands up with a bloodthirsty gleam in his eyes. I am sure they will spare my life after I help stop the dragon raids ravaging our lands. Lord Dagoth chuckles and stands up as well. Well then, he claps his hands. Welcome to the raid, gentlemen. Almiral was a tad confused at the raid name, but he found he did not much care. There was vengeance to be had. Chapter 369. Gearing Up. Raven's POV. Nudging the Redoran contingent in volunteering themselves for the mission was easier than I expected. Oh sure, I heard they were getting hit by dragon raids on the eastern edges of the Velothi mountain range, but it was apparently worse than I initially thought. And for all the apparent lack of belief in his own abilities, this Almiral was without a doubt a proper warrior champion, likely endowed with a fair bit of strength after participating in a proper dragon slaying without any arch-magi or demigods present. The challenge in surviving alone probably boosted his entire existence a fair bit. Instead of voicing my satisfaction, I nodded at the gruff elf. So in conclusion, you don't wish to be left out of the glory? I smirk. Not all that different from the Nords when you think about it. I see his eyes flash with annoyance for a brief moment, but he keeps impressive control and shakes his head. You are mistaken, Sergio. If your claim of a threat to the world is true, then we must all do our part to see it slain. Pointedly not mentioning my lack of certainty about Alduin's plans, I smile at him, a respectable stance if there ever was one. I clap my hands and one of my veteran guardsmen steps from a nearby corner, guide them to the barracks and Terran's detachment. They may pick any equipment that meets their fancy. You... The Redoran blinks in surprise, an emotion widely shared by his men. As always, he composes himself swiftly. I assure you, Lord Dagoth, our equipment is of sufficient quality. Much to the internal grumbling of his men, no doubt. I let out an amused and vaguely offended chuckle. You will find, Sarah Redoran, that the equipment I offer you is far beyond the mere standard of any other great house. I am one of the greatest enchanters to have ever lived, as you will no doubt find. I spread my arms grandly. You may even keep all you take after we are done, if you survive, that is. He goes to reject me out of hand once again, but his aide shoves his shoulder slightly and leans in to whisper an attempt to convince him otherwise. After a full minute of mental gymnastics around the stoic elf, they separate, and Almiral speaks. We will accept your generosity. He bows. The House of Redoran thanks you for the opportunity to prove our honor to the world. Slay enough dragons, and I expect the Nords will be more than willing to enter beneficial negotiations. I wink at him. After all, the High King himself leads the mortal forces of our endeavor. The implication of my words hits him immediately, and he straightens his back, gives me another deep bow, and follows my guardsman alongside his soldiery. More cannon fodder is always useful, and should at least one of them survive, I get a nice boost with the Redoran. Scorpion, I speak. My lord. The agent bows from a nearby shadow. Ensure a few of them survive the battle. You have permission to use the strategic potion reserve. Bloody near-revival potions Hakan came up with, that man is way too powerful. And inform the forges to prepare a large gift to the Redoran as thanks for their sacrifice. That ought to open many doors with the militarist house. By your will. He offers a deep bow and disappears. And with that, I too leave the dining hall, heading for a specific part of the tower, as the rest of my people who would be participating in the assault were running about all around me in preparation for the upcoming fight. Soon I reached the personal rooms of my vassal nobles and came right into the scene of Nightshade and Davos holding a no doubt rather emotionally charged conversation. Though it took them only a brief moment to notice me, as was my intention. Nightshade was thankfully not bull-headed enough to bow in her current heavily pregnant state, but still offered an inclination of her head in greeting, "My lord," while Davos simply waved, "Boss." "Nightshade, Davos?" I offer them each a nod. You two seem rather nervous. Nightshade pauses briefly and nods. "Yes. My state does not permit me to serve you as I should, and waiting here doing nothing does not sit well with me." I give her a long stare at that. A person must have their priorities in life, especially when it concerns their children. This being a point I made many times, she just nods in acceptance. Speaking of, I look to my fellow Dunmer. "Davos, you can sit this one out of you, so choose. Things will get bloody, and Nightshade isn't the only one that should be concerned with the kid." "Ah, piss on that, boss." Davos scoffs loudly, earning a quick glare from his fiancé. I think the title fits at this point. I may be scared shitless, but I am not letting you out of my sight until this is done. I told you once, and I will say it again. I am with you to oblivion and back, and no flying lizards will stop me from keeping my promise. I stare at him for a long moment before letting out a merry chuckle and giving him a quick hug and a pat on the back. The other lords must be seething with envy that I have someone this loyal. I look to Nightshade. I will bring the idiot back, even if he does his best to get his ass killed. She smiles happily at me and then threateningly at her intended, who gulps in well-justified fear. "I am very grateful to hear that, my lord." Speaking of keeping a dumbass alive, I snap my fingers and a Kulakan steps out of a nearby shadow holding a large chest. "I think it is high time you got yourself an upgrade." No doubt keeping his excitement in check, Davos nods me a thanks and opens the chest AK had just placed on the ground, revealing an absolute masterpiece of a crossbow with a drum-style magazine made from ebony and emanating enough power to make a master mage cry in envy. Below the crossbow lay a set of light plate armor with an accompanying helmet, all of it made to look sleek and ornate at the same time while still being usable by an agent of Davos's skill, with enchantments for lightness, comfort, and added protection applied to ensure his survival. The set was neatly rounded off by a magical cloak which would greatly suppress his presence and protect him from the elements. Webweaver's chitinous cunt. I hear him curse, something he no doubt learned from me. "How bloody much is this worth, boss?" I shrug. Something along the lines of 10-ish? Million septims? I shrug again. Honesty, I'd say people would quite easily go to war over it. He gawks at me like a fish out of water for far too long, as it would appear as his intended, promptly slapped the back of his head and hissed, "Thank the Lord for his grand gift, or I swear by Auriel I will send you to battle in your breeches." He winces and quickly bows before me. "Thanks, boss. I will make good use of it." Nightshade still glowers at him for the lack of formality, but my expression tells her to cut him some slack. "Just be sure not to die." I chuckle and turn to leave, Akulakan following beside me. "The meat bag is useful, but too fragile, my master." His voice booms yet remains quiet at the same time. I nod smugly. "Indeed, not all of my servants are as blessed as yourself." "As it should be." He nods immediately and with complete certainty. "None may compare with my legendary artifice, but those worthy may come close." Making some small talk with my creation, I fail to notice the time pass as I fly up the tower and make my way to its peak, where the rest of the quarrelsome quintet awaited me, all of them currently busy in some kind of debate. No doubt about something inane as they attempted to calm their nerves, though my focus was inevitably drawn to the very familiar-looking man in his prime standing at the center of the group. "Holy shit," I blurt, earning a few chuckles from my fellow archmagi. "Finally decided to drop the old man act, Tolf dear?" While it was amusing, the young old man smiles beatifically. "I need to be at my best for what is to come." "And we all thank you for the sacrifice." Savos smirks at him. "Your entire life must no doubt be shaken by the change." Phineas's glamour rolls its eyes. "Oh, come off it, you old coots. This is the 14th bloody time you are going through this whole charade." It is funny, though. Savos, Tolfdir, and Shalazar giggle, simply point out, squeak. I don't know what the fuck I am still doing with you people. The Lich mutters tiredly, you will drive me to drink, and I am dead. Would a skeleton get drunk off of milk? Shalazar ponders aloud, and Phineas shrieks in agitation before leaving just as quickly. I cup my chin. You know what I think they just might? A thing to ponder in the future, no doubt. Tolfdir smiles, and I already see plans churning behind his eyes. As he and Savos trail off in a conversation of their own, no doubt discussing the best way to try and get Phineas drunk. I look to Shalazar. You seem tame today. I tell him, something worrying you? Keep your focus, my most defiant of disciples. He squeaks with false merriment. My discoveries are of far lesser import than your grand quest. Right, so important, but not important enough to derail us. I nod. Very well, be sure to not die so you can tell me what exactly you found. Oh, don't worry. He waves me off. Even if I get killed, I won't die. I blink. I am just going to put that in a corner of my mind before the questions start coming. Probably wise. He squeaks and nods. Now off with you. You have lesser lizards to ride. As the Great One commands. I bow to him and leave for the Strundov, a rather annoying, to the dragons, name Minthara came up with for the clearing behind my tower where they all gathered. Had she not beaten the absolute shit out of Odavying earlier, I have no doubt the Red Dragon would have declared some kind of blood feud when he heard the name. I appear at the entrance to the clearing, where a large portal had already been constructed and revised on dozens of occasions by my fellow Archmagi and their apprentices. The clearing was filled to the absolute brim with champions from Skyrim, Cyrodiil, High Rock, and even a few from Hammerfell, no doubt here following Muntazir, the so-called Ebony Warrior, and now with the addition of the Redoran. As I walked through the massive group, I noticed many familiar faces, Torrig and his Jarls, most of all Jarl Balin himself, Tullius, Ricker, Tiberius, and Zarok from the Legion with their own veterans, a massive majority of the companions, many of whom sported numerous new scars from a mission they totally did not go on. Almaril and his goons accompanying Gelibor, his paladins, and my own veterans, led by the three brothers and Terran. Karsus, my steward, approaches me the moment he sees me. My lord, he bows, all weapons, armor, consumables, and reserves have been shared amongst the army of champions. We are ready and waiting for your signal to storm the enemy. I give the dutiful Mer a smile of satisfaction and lean in. Our journey will no doubt take a few hours, have a small feast prepared for them, and make sure to dump as much vitality elixir in the food, while still making it tasty enough to motivate. He nods. By your will. Ignoring the curious gazes of the rest of them, I walk up to Minthara, who was currently busying herself holding conversation with her new vassals. I make my hand unnaturally cold and poke her neck. She shrieks in surprise and jumps away, immediately glaring at me as her face reddened. God's fucking damn it all, Raven. She sighs. You were tense. I shrug with a smile. Better be angry than stuck in your mind. The elf speaks well, Thuri. Odavying speaks. Worry before battle is a boon for the enemy. I look up to the Red Dragon. I see Parthenax and your underling are missing. He nods. Indeed, the Old One continues to vex us with his foolish belief, while Vulstranfine has been instructed to await in ambush. It is his preferred strategy. I nod, remembering Windhelm, and cut Parthenax some slack. He is so powerful that his instincts must be incredibly hard to control at this point. I do to begrudge him his immense discipline. Odavying mutters, it merely vexes that one so mighty refuses to fight for what he believes in. Timeless as the Dove are, Krynarvokun cuts in. His mind is burdened by the past, and should he slay his own brothers, I do not doubt it will lead him away from his peace. At least he promised to head off any opportunity raids from the other dragons. Minthara speaks up, so we won't have to worry about another Falkreath. True enough. I shrug and give her a serious look. You ready for this? No. She sighs. Well, that is just too bad. I grin. Because we are going in anyway. She huffs and grumbles, something rather unkind to her own spiritual father, but in the end nods her assent. I turn to the group of nobles and leaders currently laser-focused on our conversation and nod at Torrig, who had let his image as a youthful king be fully subsumed by the serious ruler ready to die for his people. Wait for the signal, I tell them, and then rush through like the world itself depends on it. Not waiting for their response, I turn to Minthara, let's get this show on the round, and offer a light bow while pointing at Odavying, ladies first, of course. She forces a grin and goes to mount her vassal, while I turn to my own and do much the same. All the preparations were made, all the allies gathered, and all hidden traps mostly removed. All that was left was to do or to die. Chapter 370. Striking the First Blow. Our gigantic mounts cut through the late-night sky in a blur of their respective coloring, crossing the entirety of Skyrim within less than 2 hours. We all remained silent as we traveled, only the sound of beating wings and howling winds distracting us from our preoccupied minds. As we reached the Velothi Mountains, I felt the edges of my vision begin to shift, and soon a glamour which I could barely detect. Even now that I discovered it, gave way for a closed-off section of the mountains, revealing a massive temple complex situated atop one of its peaks, which was no doubt Skuldafn, going by the rather blatant portal to the afterlife at its peak. Before we could fully reach our destination, I spoke, "All right, I have something of a plan." "Now?" Minthara yells with some minor frustration, though the winds thankfully dampened the noise fully. Couldn't have come up with it without a good lay of the land. I shrug and the dragons slow down, moving to effectively levitate in place with whatever magic supported their flight. See that alcove there at the bottom? The surprisingly pristine and well-maintained temple complex was absolutely brimming with Draugr and cultists, and a rather discomforting collection of no less than 12 Dova, all chilling atop massive pillars or the temples themselves. Most of it was under constant patrols, units of the living and undead, marching about while on high alert and looking over every single nook and cranny of their routes. No doubt the local dragon priest got ordered to place everything on high alert now that Odavying had stopped responding. But at the bottom of the temple, where the stairwell near a large landing platform ended, things weren't simply walled off. Why would they wall off something unreachable in any case? Or so they thought. Where the temple ended, the normal mountain range continued, and my eyes were swiftly drawn to a rocky passage to the direct south of the landing platform, said passage leading into a small and, more importantly, empty clearing, a perfect place to stage our assault. She squints her eyes and nods, her eyes widening ever so slightly as she understood the implication. Yeah, doesn't seem to be very well guarded. Or at all, Crine murmurs lightly. Odavying also tosses in his 2 septims, a possible trap. Doubtful, I shake my head. My sight shows nothing, and concealing enough power to trap either of us would be near impossible, and definitely not something within the skill set of the cult. Did we not just pass through a concealment spell, though? Minthara quirks an eyebrow. Hiding a place and hiding a trap are 2 different things. I point out, remind me to get you caught up on wards when we are done with this. Best not let you die to something dumb like that. I chuckle. She gives me a deadpan look and shakes her head. Yeah. How about you tell us of your plan before we spend the rest of the night delaying the inevitable? I snort. The plan is pretty simple. Odavying, Crine, and Vulstran Fine, while we are at it, remain flying above detection range while I sneak the 2 of us to the ground. I make the portal and you guard my ass. Build portal, prepare staging ground, and begin assault. Simple. So we are to descend when the battle begins then, Thuri? Crine asks. I nod. Exactly, and not a moment earlier. Without waiting for any further response, I shadow step behind Minthara, grab onto her shoulder, and push the both of us off Odavying. She doesn't so much as blink as we hurtle to the ground, though her panic does start showing itself as we get just a bit too close to the ground for comfort. Naturally, it is then that I unfurl my own wings and cast levitation at the same time, stopping our descent a meter off the stony ground and allowing us to touch down without a single sound being made. You know, Minthara whispers as we begin sneaking through the passage, those stunts of yours are actually fun. Now that I accepted, you always make sure no one gets hurt. Excellent. I stretch the word out in a creepy croak, another soul corrupted to the true path. She gives me a blank look and lets out an amused huff before continuing. The instant we step into the clearing, I get to work. First step, a concealment ward to ensure we are not disturbed. A dozen grand soul gems should do the trick. The portal's awakening would probably wreck it, but we have the dragons to buy us a minute or two for that. Second step, expand the clearing so it can hold a small army and a base of operations. A few dozen barrels of munitions and supplies would also do quite nicely. Third step, build the portal itself. All the parts were pre-prepared, and now that we were within the wards themselves, we could quite easily abuse the orb, which really needed a more grandiose name, now that I think on it, to perfect the translocation coordinates within a strikingly short time. Fourth step, survey the area for extra advantages. Oh, hello there, conveniently placed mountain that looms over the temple. Fifth step, abuse the shit out of your alteration magic to carve literal battlements into the side of the mountain. Fairness is a concept I had long since forsaken, and ensuring my enemy was under a nice and constant shower of arrows and bolts for the duration of the battle was something I'd never say no to. Best build extra tunnels as well, just in case the dragons shout a section to bits. No point in anyone getting buried. I did not even realize it as I began humming merrily while reordering an entire mountain, crafting what could be taken as the beginning of a proper dwarf fortress if you squinted your eyes in a very specific way. Unlike I expected, Minthara was not bothered by the extra delay and instead immediately threw her largely lesser skill at molding rock to my aid, both of us gleefully imagining just how utterly ruined the day of the poor fuckers defending Skuldafen was about to be. And then came the sixth. I took in a deep breath, my magicka bubbling under my skin as it always did before a great fight, shared a quick glance and a nod with Minthara. The one to kill the least pays for the feast, I blurt, and then the simplest of gestures began the battle for the world as I snapped my fingers. Torig's POV. Never thought a feast would make me this eager to get into a fight. I hear Balgruuf chuckle while patting his stomach before he narrows his eyes, no doubt another scheme of Raven's. Bah! Harold claps him on the back. You know the brat won't ever fuck us over, just enjoy the moment. We are about to be neck-deep in dragons anyway. Not an idea I particularly mind. Sarana Volkihar cuts in with a rather disturbing hungry tinge to her tone. Her licking her lips certainly did not help the image. Personally, I can't wait. Right. Harold pales and gulps, leaning away from the vampire lady. Just make sure to not mistake any of us for the dragons. She looks to him with a beatific smile of such radiance one cold easily be blinded. I will think about it. Harold gulps again and slams back a tankard of mead, looking anywhere but at the vampire. She used to be sane, you know. I hear Raven's right hand mutter to one of the officers under him, "Why does everyone boss touch his turn unhinged?" There, Sergio, the armored Dunmer pats his back. It will all be all right. Your kingliness, a loud and adorable squeak, drew my eyes to the diminutive form of one of Winterhold's hidden archmagi. The time comes, and it comes swiftly. Call forth your warriors and prepare yourself. Having already been briefed on the mildly unhinged mystic's habits, all I do is nod and slowly get up from my seat, immediately drawing many gazes of those present. It took them but a moment longer to understand why I did so, and all of them slowly began checking on their weapons and armor one last time. Sons and daughters of Skyrim, I began, and swiftly decided to correct myself, nay, children of Nirn itself. The crowd responded with eager roars and salutes. The hour of battle is at hand. The World Eater itself feeds upon the souls of the honored dead, while it plots to take from us our freedoms and then our lives. But we will not meekly bow before the whims of a failed god, I continue, ignoring the constant roars, thumps, and battle cries, trying to snuff my voice out. Already the greatest of us prepare to guide us to the heart of the enemy. Already they aim their might at his unsuspecting minions. Are we going to let them strike them down on their own? The denial came like a tidal wave and almost made me shiver from the sheer volume. Will you follow me, my brothers and sisters, to defy the enemy of the world itself? I spread my arms widely. Will you stand by me as we fight for our future and that of our children? I feel the familiar buzz of magic behind me, and the portal begins lighting up. Free men and women of Tamriel, are you with me? A deafening "Aye!" resounded in response. I clasp my crowned helmet and draw my Skyforge blade, turning my back to the band of champions. I raise the sword, pointing at the portal, and issue a simple command: forward! And we descend upon the thin passage like an avalanche. As I stepped through, I was immediately met with a fully armored and bursting with magic. Raven, who wasted no time in pointing to the edge of the clearing we found ourselves in. Gather the melee fighters and automatons here. Send them forward when they are ready in sufficient number. He immediately moves on and points to an oddly perfectly carved staircase. All marksmen are to climb this way and rain death on the enemy. He gives me a quick nod. See you on the other side. And suddenly a pair of massive shadowy wings forms on his back, and he leaps into the skies, the immediate heating of the air and the following series of explosions and roars of pain, telling me exactly what he was doing. I looked to the Dragonborn, who looked irritated for some reason. Of course, I was then promptly reminded that the heroes of our age could have used a bit more sanity in their lives, as she angrily muttered, "No way in oblivion am I letting him win. I don't have that much money." Before I could make heads or tails of what she was muttering about, she shouted, "Mulkar Dov." All I could see was a blur of red heading towards the enemy before she disappeared completely. Shaking my head and getting my mind back into focus, I turned around and began barking orders. We had a battle to win. Dragon Priest's POV. Nakreen floated peacefully above his master's portal, forever duty-bound to guard the entrance to the afterlife and the great world eater's feeding grounds. His master had told him off the most recent treachery. How a great Dover could ever betray their eldest brother was not something the ancient priest could even comprehend. But his was the name of vengeance for a reason, and he would slay all who would dare stand against the Great One's desire. The self-aggrandizing thoughts streaming through his long-rotten mind were suddenly yanked away without hesitation or care, as he felt a massive surge of magicka in the distance, a power which could only belong to one of the enemy, he reasoned as the wave sent a shudder through the entire sacred ground of Skuldafen. He immediately signaled his undead thralls to take defensive positions and shouted a word of power to the skies to awaken the great Dove atop their places of respite. And yet, before even the first of his mighty masters could rise, a trio of traitors descended from the skies, one black as night, the other the blue of thunder and lightning, and the last and most insulting of all, a monster of blood-red scale. Their voices rang out throughout the grand temple, and their treacherous assault sent the three of the temple's mightiest protectors hurtling through the skies. The traitorous kinslayers hesitated not for a moment and rushed to end their prey before swiftly turning to the rest of their brethren. A furious despair welled up in Nakreen's cold, dead heart, but before he could direct his thralls, both living and dead, the source of the magicka made itself known as a veritable army of the living and defiant rushed through the suddenly massive gorge below the temple. A wave of arrows and battle cries cutting through the air with equal might and ferocity. Nakreen grasped his staff and grit his rotten teeth. He would avenge this betrayal and punish the defiance of the mortals by the might of his magic and the will of his master.